Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Today we're talking about the subject of relationships and disagreements in relationships. It's kind of an old adage, relationship therapists and relationship counselors will often tell you that the three things people fight about the most are sex, money, and family. And when we say family, we could mean anything from child rearing to how to get along with the in-laws, which house you're going to spend the holidays at, which in-laws house you're going to spend. It's all these things that are disagreements for people. Traditionally, we've heard of this, and you might have had some of this come up in your romantic relationship. Some of these topics on sex, money, and family. And Tony and I were sitting here saying, why is it that this is a recurring theme in relationship? Why are people having some struggle in these areas? And just like everything that we approach here at Personality Hacker, we love models and frameworks. So we went on a hunt to find a framework and a model that would help us reverse engineer what's happening here and potentially find some solutions, some leverage points, some solutions for personal growth, and some ways we can start looking at relationship through the lens of this model and framework we're going to talk about today. And the model and framework we're going to talk about today is from Abraham Maslow. And it's a classic. If you've been in Psychology 101 in college or something, you probably were exposed to Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. I'm going to let Antonia explain the model, and then we're going to discuss it because we feel like there's some gold here to mine on how it can apply to relationship.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, we oftentimes, if we're familiar with this model, we oftentimes see it as a lifelong progression, or at least that's how it was originally explained to me, as if it's, this is a lifelong achievement to go from the bottom tier all the way to the top tier. And as we talk about this model, I'd like to say that we take the approach that it's not a lifelong progression.
Yeah.
These are our basic fundamental human needs, and we come in and out of them all the time. So as we talk about, first, explain what the model looks like for those of you who are not familiar with it. As we talk about it, just kind of remember that these are not things like once we've finally established one level of need, then we've graduated and we never go back to it. We actually dip in and out of these all the time. So I just wanted to establish that before we talk about it. The hierarchy of needs, the Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, if you need a visualization, and we'll post underneath this podcast on our website, we'll post a visualization of it underneath the podcast, so you'll be able to see it. But think of it in terms of a pyramid. Maslow created a pyramid, and he had 5 different levels within that pyramid. So basically, you would draw 4 lines, which would create 5 compartments. At the bottom of the pyramid, that line is going to be the biggest, right? Or that compartment is going to be the biggest, and on up to the top of the pyramid. And that compartment is going to be at the peak of it. It's going to be the smallest compartment. But it's by no means the least important.
It looks almost like a food pyramid, if you've ever seen one of these.
Yes, exactly. It looks exactly like a food pyramid, absolutely. So, or very similar to a food pyramid. So at the bottom, that bottom compartment is what they call the survival level or physiological needs. This is where we get our physical or physiological needs met. So this would include food. This would include having shelter for the evening. This would include sex, right? Anything that is a basic physiological need that I have to have in order to get to the next day, right?
Yeah. If you ever watched the show Survivor Man on the Discovery Channel, this is where he's living all the time on that show.
Yeah, intentionally.
Just getting through the day.
That's right.
Sleeping in a shelter, whatever he can find just to survive.
Right. So that's your basic human need, right? Is your physiological survival needs. Once we have that established, though, once we know we're going to get to the next day, and that's not a big question, we graduate up to the next level of need, which is oftentimes called safety and security. So I know that I'm going to get to the next day, but am I going to make it through the next month or the next 6 months or the next year? So, in early times, this would be, I'm not just finding a cave to sleep in from night to night. I'm actually building a dwelling, right?
Yeah.
Like I have an established place that I know that is my place of safety. I can go there, sleep at night, and know that I'm not going to be messed with, right? And so safety and security needs in our modern world has translated into, am I going to make enough money to pay the bills?
Yeah.
Right? Do I feel safe in my context, right? Do I feel like I have to put 4 padlocks and 4 chain locks up on my door in order to sleep at night? Am I always feeling threatened in the area that I'm in? Or do I have a general sense of safety that I know that, I'm going to be okay? So once we have our safety and security needs met, right? And this could be anything from like physical, like where I live feels safe to me, all the way up to I know I'm going to be able to pay my bills and I'm not going to get kicked out of my house. Once we have that pretty well established, then we graduate to the next level, which is called the love and belongingness level. So this is, I know that I'm going to be physically okay. I know I feel generally safe. So the next need I'm looking to fill is that I'm accepted. Right? Like I'm socially accepted. I'm romantically accepted. I know that I have people who love me. I have my emotional needs basically taken care of. My relationship needs are taken care of. Well, once we feel like those are well established, then we graduate to the next level, which is called self-esteem. And self-esteem is when we put goals in front of ourselves, when we want to achieve, when we want to accomplish something that's bigger than just the mundane day-to-day, right? Like we feel a sense of esteem because we're doing something to contribute.
Yeah.
And then when we have that need established, then we ostensibly go up to what's called self-actualization. And this is transformative. This is when we start to see ourselves as maybe something else, not just doing something bigger, but maybe we're something else or something bigger. Maybe we have sort of a butterfly inside of us. And so self-actualization is when we come to a point where we feel good spiritually. We feel good on an enlightenment level. We feel like we're more than just the sum of our parts.
And all the other needs have been met to the point where we feel we can give back. We have enough abundance of resource and love and belonging, all these things that we're able to express ourselves without feeling like it's costing us anything.
Right. And that's why we need to establish the previous need before we can graduate to the next. One of the ways that I thought was so beautifully described to me at one point is, I don't care how self-actualized you are. If you're walking down the street and a guy mugs you at gunpoint, you're going to pretty quickly go back into survival need.
Yeah.
That's the need that's going unmet in that moment. So we need to have those what could be called basement needs. I also had it described by a friend as something called basement needs. We have to have those basement needs met before we can even consider things like contribution or becoming a better version of ourselves or whatever that looks. So in terms of a relationship, though, what I find really interesting is those three bottom needs: survival, safety and security, and love and belongingness. And all three of the things that we talked about that couples fight about the most are found within those three tiers, right? Our physiological needs include sex.
Yeah.
And relationships fight about sex. Our safety and security needs include paying the bills. Well, we fight about money as in relationships. And love and belongingness includes a relationship with our family, right? Like our what could be called, I call them storge relationships, from the Greek word storge, love for family. Family love, the love that you have for your family members. And that can be found in love and belongingness. So basically, when we fight as couples, we're fighting about needs going unmet that can be found in the first three tiers of Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah. So inside of this, then, as we're looking through these, you talked about, sex is basically the physiological level, money's at the safety and security level, and loving belongingness is the familiar or relationship level. And my guess would also be that, if you're talking about kids, for example, and their safety and security, you're talking about it's family, but it's also safety and security for your children, walking to the park, or you can see how this can get really nuanced and start to spiral out to have a lot of different components at all these different levels for all the different people in your life.
Right. Sex can be physiological need, or it can be a love and belongingness need.
Exactly.
Yeah, so these things, they're not just set in one need. The important thing, though, or I guess what this model helps shine a light on, is that when we fight, it's a signal, it's a red flag that a need is going unmet.
See, I wasn't raised this way. I don't know about you specifically. We haven't talked about this off air, quote unquote. I was raised that, I came from a kind of a religious paradigm, so it was this idea that, given to our own devices, humans are going to act kind of crappy toward each other, right? And I never got the perspective that it was just needs going unmet, these just basic needs in life. And so it was always couched in like intent, or like if you're having a fight or a disagreement, well, there's probably somebody that's wrong and somebody that's right. And it's more about you versus the other person rather than saying, wait a minute, this is about something that's a complete third entity, not between you and me in this loving relationship. This is about a need that each of us have here that's what actually we're fighting about. But instead it's couched in this like, well, you're a bad person because you don't want this to happen and I want this to happen. And like, it's really interesting for me to shift my perspective from where I was viewing things to look at this model, and it gives me more of an objective view when I'm in the middle of a disagreement with someone, in particular, a loving relationship like with you, for example. We just had this happen last week. We were talking and I just stopped and I said, what need right now is going unmet? And you're like, oh. You said, I'm not sure, but there probably is. And like, it stopped everything from the disagreement we were having. It wasn't that intense, but it really was illustrative to objectify the need instead of personalizing it toward the person and putting bad intent onto that person.
Oh, totally. Totally.
So it's a great tool in that.
Man, you hit the nail on the head. When we fight, yeah, we get a lot of programming, regardless of our upbringing. We get a lot of programming that somebody's got to be the bad guy, right?
Good versus evil.
Good versus evil. Somebody's a good guy, somebody's a bad guy. Somebody's right in this argument, somebody's wrong in this argument. And I wasn't raised in as harsh a paradigm as you were. I think you had a lot more programming about how human beings are intrinsically evil, and we're just trying to get redemption from how broken and horrible, the disgusting worms that we are. I wasn't quite given that perspective, but I was definitely, at least with my parents modeling their behavior, I was definitely given the somebody's right, somebody's wrong in any particular argument. Both perspectives are equally bad. By bad, I don't mean, morally bad. I mean like unhelpful, right? Like both perspectives are pretty unhelpful. Because if you look at it, like you just said, I guess maybe I'm just repeating what you said, but I think it's such a strong point. It could just be that the system is breaking down. Mm-hmm. It might have nothing to do with the two people that are fighting. It might just have to do with, like you said, a need is going unmet, right? Like the equivalent would be the car breaks down, and is somebody right or somebody wrong, or did you just forget to put gas in the car, right? Like the system sometimes breaks down. Mm-hmm. So recognizing it in terms of, I have a need going unmet, and if I go put gas back in the car, we can be up and going again. Wow, it just revolutionizes all conversations. And we've been fighting lately, or at least I've been fighting, and you've been holding space for me. I've been in such a terrible mood. I've been in like the worst mood. And when I go back and go, okay, so let's chart back why I've been in this terrible, heinous mood where I'm really ungenerous right now. Social media is a big part of what we do. And I'm reading comments that people leave on, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm like reading comments that people leave on the blogs or on the blog posts or on Facebook. And I have this ungenerous perspective of everything. I assume that everything is nitpicking me, and I take this martyr perspective, and like everything is bad and wrong, and I have no generosity to give to anybody else.
This is right now. I would not say this is you in general, but in the last 2 weeks, I have noticed this is true.
Yeah, this is not. In fact, I would say that this is pretty uncharacteristic of me.
Absolutely.
I like to believe, and I've done a lot of work around being quite generous. Right? When somebody comes across peevish, I almost don't see that because I'm like, oh look, they're just making a statement. But right now, I'm just like in the worst mood, and it has nothing to do with anybody else. It has to do with me not getting my needs met. Well, if you chart it back, my family, I have a very strained relationship with my family. Not from my end. I'm very accepting and happy to be a part of that family. But my parents are not okay with some of the life decisions that I've made, in particular my paradigmatic decisions. And so they have a lot of push-pull with their relationship with me. They're not okay with me, really. And I hold space, and I understand it, and I get where they're coming from, and I recognize that that's just the way it's going to be. And at the same time, when I'm around them, it's very painful, right? Because I used to be very close to my parents, and now I'm not. And they just recently came out and visited our daughter, Piper. And we had actually a pretty good time of it for a week. And then as soon as they got home, they wrote a letter saying that they should not have been so friendly with me. And it was very crushing to me, right? It was like, oh, okay, so you're actually apologizing for being nice to your daughter. Now, it sounds awful. And I know that I just want to make it clear, this is one side of a story. This is just my narrative. That's just my story and my perspective. And it doesn't necessarily it doesn't necessarily reflect reality. This is my reality and my perspective, and they have a very different story and narrative on their end, and it's just as legitimate as mine, right? Because it is their narrative, it is the world they're navigating through. But all I know is that it was hurtful to me. So I've been in a terrible mood ever since, right? I've been in this awful mood because I'm not getting my love and belongingness needs met. My feeling safe, right? This could be safety and security. My feeling safe in being lovable, my belief in my lovableness is frequently I put it into question when I experience these things. So I have nothing to give to anybody else, right? I have a need going unmet. It can't be filled by anybody else. I've got to figure it out on my own, right? Relationships are filled by other people. Having relationships fuels the love and belongingness, but ultimately it's really my responsibility to feel loved and to feel like I have a sense of belonging. And in the moment, I don't. And so I don't have any generosity to give to anybody else. So what happens? I start fights.
Yeah.
Right? Like
picking.
I feel martyred and I start picking and nothing's okay and everything's wrong, right? And you're talking about that conversation. You very politely called it a conversation. What it really was is me picking.
Discussion?
Yeah. You were just like holding space and I was just being like, off the charts nutter. And you just went, what need is going unmet? And I'm like, I don't know. Right? I didn't know at the moment. It should have been very obvious, but the need that's going unmet is love and belongingness. And it's rooted back to that and my narratives and stories and perspectives on that. But that has nothing to do with you, right? That has nothing to do with you. And yet you're the person I'm fighting with. So that's my anecdote about how this can happen. But if you zoom out and start looking at all the relationships of the world and all the married couples of the world, and looking at each one of their fights and deconstructing each fight, it really could come down to which need is going unmet.
And this model is something I've been working with in the last 5 years. It would be very easy for me, and even in the midst of like cerebrally, if I said that word correctly, cerebrally, that's a hard word to say. In the midst of me understanding this at a mental level, it still is very visceral if you're in a disagreement with someone. And it's very easy for me to almost be like, oh, maybe she doesn't like appreciate me anymore. Maybe she's losing her love for me. And so I have all of these emotions are coming up and I want to snap and respond, or react actually, not respond. And it's a lot of discipline on my part. And not that I do this perfectly. I do sometimes snap back or react instead of respond, in the fact of not realizing that it's probably a need going unmet. But working on this and just having this model is such a benefit for me in the midst of these disagreements, because I can look at something objective outside of us and say, okay, let's take a step back, take a deep breath. What might be going on here at the needs level that I could either help address or at least call out so you're aware of it, or like we can work together on solving the problem rather than attacking each other. And it's been such a great tool for me in romantic relationship now. And I think it's a really powerful tool for anybody. If you can kind of have this working model in your mind, it really gives you a framework to look at the problems rather than the person. So as we kind of unpack this a little bit more, just keep that in mind. This is a good model for this. And I think I've experimented with it enough that I'm pretty confident it will work for you if you have it in your mind clearly about what you're doing with it. So
I think of that adage that couples fight the most amount money, usually. Money is really a big one. And that's a safety and security need. When couples are fighting, it means they both feel like they're not safe, right? I'm not going to be able to pay the bills. Maybe a bill is going, like when it comes down to things like rent and electricity and water and these things that in the developed world have become necessities in our mind, regardless of whether or not you could live off the grid. It doesn't matter. And most of us couldn't because we haven't been trained to.
Yeah.
So they've become necessities.
Sure.
So, oh my gosh, the water bill hasn't been paid for 3 months and it's going to be shut off, right? How do you not start fighting with your mate, right? And we want to assign blame, and you're not working hard enough, or you're out of work and you haven't been looking for a job hard enough, or why couldn't you just play the game at the office a little better and, get ahead and make more money? Why did you have to, like you talked me into having all these kids and now we're saddled with them and we can't pay the bills, or whatever the argument becomes, right? Whatever the story becomes. It ultimately comes down to a feeling. I feel unsafe. I feel that way, right? And so because I feel that way, I'm going to bring the need of feeling safe, right? That's going unmet. So I'm going to bring all that anxiety and stress to my relationship with you. And we actually had didn't we do a podcast on what's called donkey smuggling? Sometime early last year, I believe. I can't remember. If we did, we'll link to it underneath this podcast. We
smuggling emotions. If I'm remembering now, I'm sitting here racking my brain. It's smuggling emotions of the title, smuggling emotions something. It's way back at one of the earliest podcasts.
Yeah, and exactly. And I call it smuggling donkeys because we used the illustration of donkey smuggling, which you'll have to go listen to that podcast to hear. That said, it's basically, I am feeling an emotion that I haven't really reconciled yet. I haven't figured that one out inside of me. So I can't really address that thing. So I'm going to pretend it's this thing over here. And I'm going to use this thing over here as an outlet for the emotion that's over there that I can't really deal with yet. Right? So I'm going to smuggle that emotion. I'm going to let it hop the train over on this emotional interchange. And that's why my response to you is disproportionate to the situation. We do that all the time. And if we're feeling constant stress over not feeling safe and secure, we're going to smuggle those emotions and say it's your fault somehow, right? Like, I'm upset with you. You did something wrong because I feel unsafe. Very common. And that doesn't mean that that's the case. It actually, what's great about this model is that you can you can just immediately, remove that blame game with that word, with that phrase that you used, which need is going unmet.
Yeah. And my guess is if you do this with your lover or spouse or the person you're in an intimate relationship with, they might resist that because you're saying it's just a need going unmet and it's not the actual, they might even get upset by you calling it out as a need rather than the real quote unquote issue in their mind.
It can't be an accusation.
Exactly.
It's got to be an honest, sincere question.
However, when you're in the midst of a disagreement and things are intense and you're zoomed so far in, it's hard to not see things as accusations when you're going back and forth with a lover. It's just the nature of it. Yep. And so sometimes you almost need a cooling off period or just to couch it very carefully. And then even if you couch it carefully, it can be misinterpreted as patronizing, like, oh, you don't think I can handle real conversation. You have to say anything in a really careful way. So it's like, all these things can come up and just add more complication to this. I just also want to say that, you're talking about money on a big scale of paying the bills for the month or multiple months and things of this nature. This can pop up also just if you haven't eaten lunch. I mean, it's basic stuff. You down at the very bottom of the physiological needs, you skipped lunch that day. You instead of, you were at the office, you skipped lunch, you went out and ran some errands, you finished up your workday, you come home, your wife and your children are at home, you haven't eaten yet. And your son says something and your wife asks you to empty the dishwasher or whatever, and you just explode and start yelling at her about whatever. This is not from my personal experience. I don't think I've ever yelled at you about the dishwasher. This is an example that off the top of my head. And it has nothing to do with anybody or anything, that it just comes down to the fact that you just didn't eat that day, right? And you physiologically just don't feel good. Your mind's not sharp. You're hungry. You're irritable. And you just need to eat something. And then all of a sudden you eat dinner and you're like, what was I even upset about? I don't even know why I was angry and frustrated earlier. Oh, maybe it was because I just needed to eat something. So it can be something simple like getting a basic hunger need met, or it could be a little bit more complicated at the next level up the safety and security level of paying the bills and things of this nature. And what's really crazy is when those start to blend together. You've got multiple ones stacked. Maybe you haven't had sex for a week. You didn't eat lunch that day. And all of a sudden, the tax bill came, and you're like, "Wait, I thought we were going to refund and we owe taxes." And it's like,
kaboom.
and then your son gets sick or something, and you got to take him to the hospital. And now you're just you explode, and you start yelling at your mate or your lover, and it has nothing to do with them or you or your relationship. It just happened to be a perfect storm of these needs going unmet. And now there's this blame game and this big fight, and it's just this kind of thing can happen very easily. So this model again begins to objectify what's going on, not make it so personal. And I think that's a really great frame to come from.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. You and I were even talking about how we've been going to bed so late recently.
Yeah.
Because we work really late. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like...
We have Australian and Asian students that are middle of the night texting and communicating, and we're trying to respond to people 24/7 in a global business.
And, we own our own business, which means that we get the flexibility of time of when we want to work on things. And at the same time, it means that we're never not working, right? Like we try to create some pretty decent boundaries around it, but it's very difficult to do, especially since we actually like what we do. And so, we're like 10:30 at night and we're still on our laptops in bed, right? And, we've been doing this like really, intense communication to somebody who maybe needed a lot of help, and it took us like an hour to craft this email back, and now it's bedtime, right? And you can't just go to bed, right? Your brain is racing, right? You can't just fall asleep. So it's not uncommon for us to like go to bed really late, right? Fall asleep extremely late. And then we have a 2.5-year-old who is the most incredible precise alarm clock that I've ever experienced. And so, it's not like we just sleep in. It's like, well, we just lost that couple of hours of sleep. That happens over and over and over again. All of a sudden, we're massively sleep deprived, right? Way behind on our sleep, and now we're at each other's throats, and we don't really think about it because it's like a death by 1,000 cuts, right? Like it just happened over time. It wasn't like last night I only got 2 hours of sleep, so I'm cranky. It's like I've been missing 2 hours of sleep for the last month, and each night. So like I don't really know it, but I'm a horrible she-bitch and I'm a monster, and don't get anywhere near me, but I didn't really understand the etymology of it. So I think really having these needs on your radar and really understanding how they impact you and making sure that you're getting your needs met. At least in the United States, I'm not sure, I think Europeans are actually so much more balanced on this. I'm not sure about other parts of the world. I've observed the balance that certain European countries have, and maybe other European countries don't have it as much. But there's propaganda in the United States that if you get your needs met, you're some terrible selfish person. Right? Like you're always supposed to drop everything you're doing to get somebody else's need met. Now that might feel like it's contradictory to the concept of the selfish American, but I've not really, as a female, not seen any real propaganda about get your needs met first.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's always like you need to be running to make sure that everybody else is taken care of. And then if you have time at the end of the day, go have a cup of tea. Right? And that's your need.
I've seen a couple marketing messages in the last few years about you're a busy mom, you've been working with the kids all day. Now it's time for you to, take some time for yourself and visit the spa or get this ice cream product or you eat this Yoplait yogurt or whatever. But very minimal. It's not very pronounced.
Well, and to sell the spa.
Sure.
And the Yoplait yogurt, right? But anytime something feels like a luxury item, I think actually it probably comes along with the A-type personality, which is very pushed in the United States. Like you are supposed to make sure that your kid is in every conceivable after school activity. And you should be running to make sure that they're in every possible activity to make sure they get in a good college and then, get a good job and then, live the templatized life that they'll probably hate. But that's your job as a parent, is to get them there. and so we have this concept that getting our needs met is somehow wrong and we're selfish and we're not like good citizens if we do that. And yet, if everybody was getting their needs met, like globally on the planet, there would be no need for tension. Everybody would feel so good. We would all be like, why are we fighting again? I feel pretty good. Like on a micro level and on a macro level, we're all getting our needs met, so everything's cool. Getting your needs met is the way to give back to other people. Mm-hmm. Like it's that whole adage of on an airplane, if the masks drop, you put your oxygen mask on first and then help others with theirs. And it's because if you don't put your oxygen mask on in time, you're going to be useless to everybody else. And now everybody else is going to have to help you. And so getting your needs met is this, it seems like a revolutionary idea to some people. They hear it, right? They hear that it's important, but this idea that no, you need to. Like it's a need. It's called a need for a reason. And if you're not doing it, you're actually creating a drain.
Well, and the other thing that comes up is these needs that are going unmet will fight to be met. So what happens is if you are, let's say, in a loving relationship and you're not intimate with your partner, you have a need for intimacy, for sexual, relations with them, like sex, intimacy, romance, if that's not coming out in a relationship, well, that's where infidelity, the spark of infidelity might trigger. because someone's saying, well, I'm not getting my need met here, so I'm going to look elsewhere. And they might start, maybe not cheat on their mate, but they might start acting in erratic behaviors. And it may not even be cheating. It might just be emotional withdrawal or something to where they're trying to, and it puts that wedge in the relationship, right? Because there's this need, and the person is going to attempt to get it met, even if they're not conscious that they have it. Their unconscious mind knows they have this need, and they'll look for ways to fill it, even synthetically. And oftentimes it causes even more problems because it's not a legitimate fulfillment. It's just a synthetic Band-Aid over that need. And here we've got even more problems compounding. So getting your needs met also is more of like a proactive way to maintain a good relationship with your lover. It's a good way to tend the garden of your relationship, if you will, right? You're weeding out the bad stuff, you're feeding, you're nurturing, and you're helping that relationship grow by focusing not selfishly on your needs, but focusing on making sure you're showing up as the best version of yourself. And helping kind of watch for the blind spots of your partner. Say, hey, I think you got this need going, Matt. Maybe we could talk about how we can give you some time to fill this or whatever.
Yeah. Do you need a sandwich? Let me go make you a sandwich. Well, and we talked about this for us. You never get alone time. You never get alone time. And I almost feel like sometimes I have to fight you to make sure that you get your need of alone time met. And I believe you do the same thing for me. I have needs that I have a habit of ignoring. Mm-hmm. It's just a habit, right? It's not really that. And because it's a habit, I become resistant to getting that need met in a weird, like counterintuitive, bastardized way. I have this need going unmet and you're trying to get me to meet it. And I'm like, no, I'm fine, right? Like I have this stoic, stiff upper lip. And the same thing with, I can think of this one right now because you and I actually had a conversation about it today, right? Like you're getting alone time tonight and you're like, oh my gosh, it's so rare. I don't even know what to do. It's like I feel all this pressure to make sure it's high quality alone time, right? Because you seriously haven't gotten alone time probably in 6 months. Yeah. So, and I'm like, we need to make sure that we're scheduling it. We need to make sure that we are going, okay, Joel needs alone time at least one evening every 2 weeks, right? And for the introverts, you probably are screaming one evening every 2 weeks, but we're both extroverts, so we need minimal alone time.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because it is true that I feel like I need more alone time. And one thing that's been happening for me is, we'll go to bed late after working really long and we'll chill out, maybe watch something, read something just to calm ourselves down to be able to go to sleep late. You'll fall asleep and I'm still like, man, I want to read this article in this magazine that I've been trying to read for like 2 weeks, or I want to, read this chapter in this book or write in my journal. And now it's like 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm staying up till maybe 2 or 3. And that's my alone time, sitting in bed, writing in my journal. That's like, I'm trying to steal it. And then I wake up the next day and I'm exhausted because I stayed up late to get some alone time to just journal. And here this one need's getting met, but now it's causing a problem on the other end of a sleep need not getting met. And so then I'm irritable and you might say something and I snap at you. It's because I was trying to meet one need by sacrificing another instead of thinking through how to meet these. So again, this is a very personal story that we're telling. We're telling you kind of a little glimpse into our lives and how this works for us. But I think it's helpful for you to see how couples might exhibit this. And I'm sure if you're in a lover relationship, this kind of stuff comes up for you.
Yeah, and help each other out. Like your needs that you have a tendency to ignore or have a tendency to go unmet are mostly physiological needs, I've noticed.
Yeah.
Like, I guess alone time could be considered possibly physiological. You probably need decompression time for a number of different reasons. But that said, it's usually physiological needs for you. For me, it's emotional needs, right? I just have this image of myself, or at least I used to, that I could compartmentalize any emotion and I was totally fine and anybody could say anything to me and I had no problem with that, right? And I was totally, completely fine with any emotional interchange that I had with another person. And that is just bullcrap. Like, I'm so impacted and affected by other people. But I've got this story that I'm always resisting and fighting at this point that I don't have any emotional needs, right? And so I don't have those on my radar, and I have a tendency to resist any insinuation that I need to get that need met. Whereas that's very much on your radar. You're very good at picking that out. You can, when you said, what need do you have going unmet? And I said, I don't know. And you're like, I think I know it. And you're the person who suggested, I think that interaction with your parents actually affected you more than you're letting on or acknowledging to yourself. And it took me a while to agree with you, but when I finally did, I was like, he's got it. seems very obvious in retrospect. It's just that's not what's on my radar. So as a couple, you can be watching, like have each other's back. Get an idea of what it is that the other person has a tendency to neglect, right? Like they have a tendency to just not have that on their radar, and help fill in the gaps for them. Help make sure, you need some alone time. I'll make sure that you get that, right? Because you're not going to make sure on your own. At least right now you're not. And maybe after, over time, if I hold that space for you and I make sure you get that need met, then maybe you'll understand how important it is, and you'll just kind of, you'll take the torch and run with it. And vice versa. I'm getting much more sophisticated emotionally just since I've been in a relationship with you, because you've taught me what to look for, what some of the markers are. So, what are the needs that you have a tendency to neglect, and what are the needs that your mate has a tendency to neglect, and can you have each other's back on that?
I want to highlight something you mentioned earlier that was very important and brilliant that we kind of just glossed over really quick and kept talking. You had this phrase, you talked about, it doesn't even matter if it's, well, I don't know how you said this, but this is my interpretation of what you said, and then we can unpack it. It was basically this idea that it doesn't even matter if it is objectively an actual need. What matters is, does it feel like a need going unmet? The narrative around it. So, and I just want to highlight that again, because we talked a little bit, but I think this is important, because if you're with your lover, your mate, and they say, maybe it's your wife or your girlfriend, and she says, I feel like we are not going to be able to pay rent this month, and it's really stressing me out. And that it's probably going to be okay. But, like the facts are that this payment's going to come in like 5 days before rent's due because you sold something here in your business, or you're getting a bonus or whatever, your paycheck's going to hit. But it's more about how she's feeling about the issue. Well, that feeling is very real to that person. And that feeling is what they're basing it off of. Not like, it usually is a need that's going unmet, but sometimes it's just the feeling of a need going unmet, or a worry that the need might go unmet, especially at that safety and security level in particular, or at the love and belongingness level. You were talking to that woman over there. Does that mean you're interested in her and no longer interested in me? Now like the feeling is that he's wandering just because he was talking to this woman or whatever. Like all these little nuances of the feeling creates our reality or our narrative around it. And I wanted to re-highlight that, because I think that thing you brought up about the feeling is so important. It's not just the need, but it's also what you feel is the need. Yeah.
Especially when we have a tendency, if we're not experiencing the same feeling, to marginalize it in another person.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's ridiculous. Why would you feel that way?
Yeah, like, okay, so your safety and security need is going unmet because you feel unsafe, and I don't feel unsafe because I know we're going to be fine this month. And so now I'm going to say, well, that's stupid.
We're totally okay.
We're totally fine.
Your feeling's invalid.
Yeah. And what's interesting about this is that all of our stories and narratives and quote unquote feelings are fundamentally irrational, right? Because our feelings surface from our central nervous system. Our central nervous system is picking up stimuli, and that stimuli creates a response and reaction, and our brain goes, we should experience a feeling about this in order to deal with it, right? Because that's the birthplace of feelings, right? Central nervous system picks up stimuli. Our brain interprets it into an emotion in order to spur action, right, as a response to that stimuli. And because we're uber smart and have this like huge neocortex, we as humans have added one more layer that is called story or narrative, or we call it explanation, right? We call it like, this is the explanation of what's going on, right? Yeah. And really the explanation is just a rationalization for an irrational emotion. And all the emotion is a response to our stimuli. So when you look at it that way, all of our feelings are irrational. Really, they're just responses. And all of our stories, some people's stories are really sophisticated and really good. And they're very, very, very good at saying, my story is better than your story, and let me tell you why and explain why. And that doesn't mean their story is any better. It just means they've gotten better at explaining it.
Sure.
Right? The feeling is the thing anyway. And I know, as a thinker, and other people who are listening to this podcast you might be a thinker, the listener. It's so difficult to acknowledge that about ourselves because we want to think, no, we're totally rational. We live in the world of rational analysis, like the things that can be proven. And really, all of that is just just story to explain a feeling that we have. So anytime you attempt to, or not attempt to, anytime you have a knee-jerk response to marginalize somebody else's feeling on something, right? Remember that that feeling is just as irrational as all of your feelings, right? They just might not have as good a story concocted to explain the feeling. It's really the feeling that we're addressing. When we talk about your safety and security needs, safety is a feeling. We experience safety through feeling. We feel safe. So anything that comes in the line of safety and security is all about a feeling.
Yeah. And you can see this through, a basic example of this is the airport security. They're giving you an illusion of safety. If someone really wanted to bomb an airplane, they're going to get through and bomb an airplane. But the federal government here in the United States wants us to feel safe, to control the masses, to make them feel calm, and everybody just goes through their, normal day in an airport. But they're trying, basically the TSA here in the United States is trying to manage the feelings of the populace.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous. It's one of those infrastructural things that I roll my eyes at hugely, and I go, okay, well, that's just reality right now in 2015, and that's just what we have to live with. And I'm waiting for it to go away because I'm waiting for that feeling to run out. I'm waiting for people's feeling of irritation to eclipse their feeling of lack of safety.
Sure.
And that's usually what it is. It's just a war of feelings anyway. So the reason why I said all that is not only to help people stop marginalizing their mate's feelings, but also to go, okay, so I'm feeling unsafe. Is there any reason why I maybe don't need to feel unsafe? Right? Can I feel safe right now? Is this a knee-jerk response in me, right? Is my feeling, based on a trigger of something I experienced in the past? Is this just muscle memory, right? Like, I'm not 100% sure how we're going to pay the water bill. It's not 3 months late. It's, maybe $20 over our budget. And oh God, it's $20 over our budget. And now I feel super duper unsafe. Is that because I just have this concept of how a budget's supposed to work in my mind and I don't actually have to feel unsafe? We know of a couple who are very successful and they have, a dual income house. And one of them, and both well into the six figures. And one of them didn't have as much success as the other one for a while. And they both started to feel unsafe, right? Like, even though they're one of their single incomes trumped our dual income for a while, right? Like, sure. I was like, you're feeling unsafe, right? I'm like, you're making more money than we are combined with one of you, yeah. And you're feeling unsafe, but it's because it's a feeling. And so the question is, how can we manage our feelings as individuals? How can we make it so that we don't have to feel unsafe, right? Like, can I see it from a different perspective? Can I see it from a perspective of this need is actually going met and it's going to be okay? And I can kind of calm that feeling down through rationalization, through a better story, right? Yeah. I can create a narrative or story that serves me better and goes, I think we're going to be just fine. And then kind of calms that down. So on one hand, not marginalizing your mate's feeling, and on the other hand, taking full responsibility for your feelings.
Sure. And
going, can I manage my feelings a little bit better so that these needs, I can see them in a way that maybe they are going met. And I was just maybe, auto-responding with a feeling of a need.
Absolutely. So we're talking about getting your needs met in relationship. We started off talking about couples fighting about sex, money, and family. And these themes coming up and applying Maslow's hierarchy of needs to this idea that couples are fighting about this, and we can reverse engineer basically what might be going on here. Now, this is just a map and a model. Again, models aren't reality. They're just ways to view reality. And so we hold loosely to the model of Maslow. But it seems like a model that works really well from my perspective, having used it in relationship, in friendship, in my life, and just kind of looking at things objectively and placing it on this hierarchy model really helps me personally. I know it's helped you as well in how we look at things. So I encourage you to look a little more into Maslow, read some things. I think we've got a few articles online. If not, we probably will write some in the next few months. So our website, personalityhierarchy.com, is going to have some resource there. But just look at this and begin to think about relationships in terms of getting needs met. I mean, if that's all you take away from this podcast, that would be a really powerful thing to think about. When you and your mate, you and your spouse, your lover, are in a disagreement or an intense discussion or something where you're having tension, even if you just do it to yourself for right now, don't even bring it up in the conversation, but just stop and say, wonder what needs are going unmet for me and for the other person. That is going to be a great reframe to start thinking objectively about what's going on rather than just always blaming the other person. Because usually it's my now perspective that we as humans want to have good intent for ourselves and others, and we get derailed through these feelings of whatever, safety and security, love and belongingness not being met, our physiological needs not being met, and really it comes down to getting those needs met. And if you can get those needs met, we tend to behave with really good intent as humans. And I think people respond well when their needs are met. I think they do well when their needs are met.
I would agree. As an exercise, maybe this could be helpful, because I was thinking, anytime the conversation turns heated, if you just remind yourself to ask which need is going unmet for either yourself or your mate. But I think by the time you get to a heated conversation, you're really not being that thoughtful.
Sure.
So maybe put it on a sticky note, the phrase, which need is going unmet, and put it up on your bathroom mirror, right? Ask yourself every day, which need is going unmet? And if you can honestly answer none of them, you should probably have a pretty good day.
Yeah.
Like, just keep asking yourself, which need is going unmet? And write it everywhere. Like, write it on your hand with ink, which need is going unmet, right? And that might feel like a negative way of seeing the world, but really, it's not negative. We should be asking ourselves that all the time, because there probably is a need we need to maintenance. Mm-hmm. I need to drink more water. I need to get more rest. Maybe I need to go get food right now because I'm hungry. I'll eat a handful of almonds. Do I need to make sure that I'm connecting with people I love? Do I need to check my, don't check the bank balance religiously, but, do I just,
Sure.
what do I need to check in with right now? Am I getting my self-esteem needs met, which we'll talk about later in a future podcast on Maslow and personal development. But just ask yourself which need is going unmet. And if the answer is authentically no, you're probably in a pretty good space. So if you're constantly asking yourself that question in all sorts of different, avenues, platforms, and contexts, when an argument comes up, you're going to have already programmed your brain to think in terms of needs. And you can just stop the conversation and go, wait, before we move on, which need is going unmet? Mm-hmm. For myself or the other person, right? Which need is going unmet? Can we address it right now? Can we just make this happen? And then see if the conversation takes a much smoother direction after that. So that's our recommendation.
Absolutely. So these podcasts, if you've been listening to the Personality Hierarchy podcast, you've heard me say this before. This is a discussion starter, not a discussion ender. This is the launching pad for us as a community. I mean, I consider you listening right now part of this conversation with Antonia and I. It's asynchronous. You can't talk to us right now, but you can talk to us online and leave comments, and we can talk back and have a discussion around this. One of the best places to do that is over at the Facebook page right now, facebook.com/personality hacker. Another great place is on Twitter. It doesn't leave as much room for discussion because it's 140 characters, but it's a great place. Personality Hack is the username, so it's twitter.com/personality hack, HACK. And of course, the website personalityhacker.com. You can leave comments under this podcast and we can have a discussion back and forth and get better ideas. I feel like some of the best ideas come from the community of like minds, just like yourself, who say, yeah, I hear what you're saying about the needs being met. And also I've had this experience and this is something that's worked for me. And then someone else riffs off of it. And then someone else riffs off of it. And now we've got a community of like minds, just like you, coming together to become better versions of ourselves as a group. And I think that's such an exciting way to go through the world, is to find other people who are just as invested in personal growth and development like you are, and joining with them, joining with us. And we all do this together, because I think that's really exciting to grow humanity forward that way.
And if you love our podcasts, please go to iTunes and rate us. You can subscribe there as well. Go and rate us, give us a review, let us know how we're doing. And that's a part of the conversation too. And if you have podcast ideas, if you want to hear something, if you feel like there's something you'd really love to have a conversation around and you're not finding that conversation coming up in your life and you'd love to hear a conversation around it, please let us know. Leave us a message and go, hey, I'd love to hear a podcast on so-and-so topic. And
if we know about it, we'll talk about it. And if we don't, we'll pretend like we do. I'm just kidding. We won't do that. But.
Oh, that's our dirty secret. We're all just pretending to know what we're talking about. That is truer to reality than anything else we could say.
But I think we're all doing that. Anyway, my name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we can't wait to see you online on the community and talk to you with the next podcast.